The gate agent, a woman named Linda, with eyes as hard as rivets, held up Serafina Hayes's first-class ticket as if it were a dirty tissue. "Honey, this looks like some kind of employee pass." She sneered, her voice loud enough for the entire gate to hear. "First class is for people who can actually afford it." She didn't know that the pass she was mocking was a transitional document from a federal bankruptcy court. And she certainly didn't know that the quiet black woman standing before her wasn't just an employee. She was the new owner of the entire airline. Chicago O'Hare International Airport is a monument to controlled chaos, a city of steel and glass where 1 million human dramas play out every day. At Gate K-12, in the aging domestic terminal, one such drama was beginning to smolder. The gate bore the faded logo of Pinnacle Airlines, a carrier with a 60-year history and a reputation as dusty as the threadbare carpets in its waiting area. Pinnacle had once been a titan, a proud legacy airline, but years of mismanagement, union strife, and an inability to adapt had driven it into the abyss. 3 months ago, it had been unceremoniously hauled into bankruptcy court, its assets about to be liquidated, its history erased. Then came the ghost. Her name was Serafina Sarah Hayes. To the financial world, Sarah was a legend. She was the founder and managing partner of Phoenix Capital, a private equity firm that specialized in the impossible. They didn't buy healthy companies, they bought corpses. They stalked bankruptcy courts and auction blocks, looking for iconic but broken American companies they could resurrect. Sarah was a turnaround artist of the highest order, a brilliant and notoriously ruthless strategist who saw value where others saw only ruin. She had fought for Pinnacle Airlines in a brutal month-long bidding war in a Delaware bankruptcy court. She saw what the others missed: a valuable route network, a skilled if demoralized workforce of mechanics and pilots, and a brand name that with enough work could be salvaged. She hadn't just bought it, she had won it. She was now, as of 3 weeks ago, the sole undisputed owner of the entire airline. But here at Gate K-12, she was invisible. She was dressed in a simple but elegant grey cashmere turtleneck, comfortable black trousers and flat leather shoes. Her hair was styled in intricate micro-braids, and her only accessory was a classic watch on her wrist. She was traveling with her lead counsel and chief of staff, Arthur Vance, a distinguished silver-haired man in his late 60s who was dressed in a classic Savile Row suit. They were in Chicago for the final brutal round of negotiations with the Machinists' Union, the last major hurdle in Sarah's ambitious plan to drag Pinnacle into the 21st century. As they stood near the boarding area, their conversation was a low murmur of high-stakes strategy. "The union leadership is still posturing," Arthur said, reviewing notes on his tablet. "They think we're just another corporate raider coming to strip the company for parts. They don't understand your vision. They will," Sarah said, her gaze fixed on the ground crew moving on the tarmac. The old Pinnacle was a country club for executives that bled its workers dry. The new Pinnacle will be a lean, efficient machine where everyone from the baggage handler to the CEO shares in the profits. We're not firing mechanics. We're giving them a stake in the company. They just don't know it yet. Her vision was revolutionary, but a revolution cannot succeed if the old guard still controls the gates. At the podium stood Linda Kowalski. Linda was Pinnacle Airlines distilled to its most bitter, resentful essence. A gate agent for 28 years, she was a union lifer who had survived wave after wave of layoffs. She saw the bankruptcy not as a result of the company's failures, but as a personal betrayal. She despised the faceless new owners. She had heard whispers about the vultures from New York who had bought her company for pennies on the dollar. Her loyalty was to the ghost of the old Pinnacle, and she wielded her petty authority like a shield against the terrifying uncertainties of the future. Her face was set in a permanent sour frown, and her eyes held the weary cynicism of someone who had seen it all and was impressed by nothing. Beside her stood a younger agent, Ben Carter. Ben was new hired by the transition team put in place by Phoenix Capital. He was bright-eager and believed in Sarah's vision of a revitalized airline. He represented the future. Linda saw him as a naive fool, a corporate stooge, and she missed no opportunity to remind him who was in charge at this gate. The flight to New York's LaGuardia was about to board. Sarah and Arthur held first-class ticket seats, 2A and 2B. The tickets, however, were not standard. They were transitional documents issued directly by the bankruptcy court's administrative office with a simple block letter font and a federal watermark. They were in essence the keys to the kingdom. To Linda Kowalski they looked like forgeries. As Sarah and Arthur approached the podium, Linda's eyes narrowed her internal radar for anything that deviated from her long-established routine, already screaming. She looked at Sarah, at her simple clothes and braided hair, and her prejudice, marinated in decades of bitterness, immediately kicked in. She then looked at Arthur, the older, distinguished white man in the expensive suit. Her entire demeanor shifted. She offered him a flicker of a smile. "Good morning, sir," she said, her attention focused entirely on Arthur. "Ready to board? We both are," Arthur replied, gesturing politely to include Sarah. He handed Linda both boarding passes. Linda took them, her eyes flicking from the strange-looking documents to Sarah's face. The gears of her resentment began to grind. An employee, she thought. A low-level corporate nobody from the new ownership getting a free ride in first class, while real loyal employees like her had their pensions slashed. The injustice of it all, a fiction of her own creation, began to boil within her. The stage was set. The drama was about to begin. Linda held the 2 boarding passes in her hand, but her focus was entirely on the one belonging to Serafina Hayes. The paper felt slightly different. The font was unfamiliar. In her 28 years of service, she had developed a sense of what was right, and this was profoundly offensively wrong. Her suspicion, fueled by her ingrained prejudice, quickly hardened into certainty. She saw the whole picture in her mind. The new corporate owners were flying their lackeys around in luxury, probably on some sort of cheap internal employee pass that had somehow been miscoded for a first-class seat. The distinguished man in the suit, Arthur, was probably the executive. The black woman, Sarah, was likely his assistant, his subordinate, a beneficiary of a corporate perk she didn't deserve. She decided to make an example of her. It was an act of petty rebellion, a small blow struck for the old dying pinnacle against the new, faceless entity that now owned her life. She held up Sarah's ticket, pinching it between her thumb and forefinger as if it were contaminated. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice a loud theatrical drawl that attracted the attention of the other passengers in the priority line. "We seem to have a problem with this ticket." Sarah, who had been expecting a smooth boarding, looked at her, her expression calm. "Is there an issue?" "An issue? Honey, yes. There's an issue." Linda sneered to the condescending term of endearment, landing with the force of a slap. She tapped the ticket. "This doesn't look like any of our standard first-class ticket stock. This looks more like a non-revenue employee pass, a staff pass." She then turned to Arthur, her entire demeanor softening, becoming conspiratorial. "Sir, I do apologize for the inconvenience," she said, treating him as the sole victim of the situation. "It appears there may have been a mistake with your companion's booking. Sometimes the system glitches when booking employee travel. The deliberate separation of the two of them, the assumption that Arthur was the legitimate passenger and Sarah the interloper, was a masterful piece of subtle, discriminatory theatre. Arthur Vance, a man who had argued cases before the Supreme Court, recognized it instantly. His expression hardened. "There is no mistake," Arthur said, his voice a low, warning rumble. "We are traveling together. Our tickets were issued from the same source at the same time. They are both valid first-class fares." Linda ignored him, her focus remaining lasered in on Sarah. "Is that right?" she said, her voice dripping with disbelief. She held the ticket up to the light, a pantomime of intense scrutiny. "Because the security features look all wrong. I'm going to need to see some identification, and I'll also need to see proof of payment for this ticket." The demand was an outrageous breach of protocol. A gate agent might ask for ID, but to demand proof of payment was a direct accusation of fraud. It was a clear and unambiguous challenge. The junior agent Ben Carter, who had been processing passengers at the adjacent podium, overheard the exchange and felt a surge of anxiety. He had been in the briefings. He knew the new ownership team used non-standard travel documents issued by the Transition Authority. He knew exactly what this ticket was. He leaned over to Linda, his voice a nervous whisper. "Linda, I think that's one of the new transition passes. From the Phoenix Capital team. We got a memo about it last week. It's legitimate." Linda shot him a look of pure venom, a silent command to shut his mouth and mind his own business. "I know what a real ticket looks like, Ben," she hissed under her breath. "And this ain't it. Stay out of it." She turned back to Sarah, her smile triumphant, believing she had successfully cornered her prey. "Well, do you have a receipt for this supposed ticket? Or are you going to admit this is just a misunderstanding and find your real seat in the back?" The mockery was now overt. She wasn't just questioning the ticket. She was questioning Sarah's very right to exist in this space. She was using the flimsy piece of paper as a weapon to enforce her own bigoted worldview, to humiliate the woman she had already tried and convicted in the court of her own prejudice. The other passengers were now openly staring a silent jury to the unfolding drama. Sarah stood at the center of it all, her expression unreadable, her calm demeanor, a stark, powerful contrast to Linda's loud, aggressive performance. The atmosphere at Gate K-12 had curdled. The mundane frustration of a typical boarding process had been replaced by the charged, uncomfortable tension of a public shaming. The passengers in the priority lane shifted on their feet, some with embarrassment, others with a grim sense of voyeuristic interest. They were watching a power play unfold, and the woman in the cashmere turtleneck was clearly on the losing end. Seraphina Hayes looked at Linda, then at the growing line of onlookers, and made a calculated decision. She would not be provoked. She would not raise her voice. She would follow the process, allowing the system to reveal its flaws at every turn. She had not bought Pinnacle Airlines to win shouting matches at the gate. She had bought it to tear down the very culture of disrespectful arrogance that Linda embodied. This was not a confrontation. It was a real-time diagnostic test of a diseased corporate body. "I do not have a paper receipt," Sarah said, her voice still infuriatingly calm. The ticket was arranged by the administrative office of the Transition Authority. However, the ticket has a barcode. If you would simply scan it, your system will confirm its validity, and we can all move on. This simple, logical request seemed to enrage Linda even further. To scan the ticket would be to cede control, to allow a machine to potentially contradict her infallible human judgment. It was a surrender she was unwilling to make. "I'm not scanning anything until I'm satisfied it's a legitimate document." Linda snapped her voice, rising. She was now performing for the crowd, casting herself as the diligent, security-conscious employee protecting the airline from a potential freeloader. For all I know, this barcode could link to a seat in coach. We've had people try to pull that trick before, trying to get the free drinks and the bigger seat. It's a sad world. The collective gasp from the passengers was almost audible. The accusation was no longer just about fraud. It was a direct, demeaning assault on Sarah's character. She was being painted as a cheap grifter, a common thief. Ben Carter, the junior agent, could not stay silent any longer. His conscience and the memory of the ethics training he had just received as a new hire compelled him to act. "Linda, that's not appropriate," he said, his voice shaking slightly but clear. "The memo was very specific. We are to accept all travel documents bearing the Federal Transition Authority watermark without question. Please just scan the ticket." Linda turned on him, her face a mask of pure fury. "You're new here, kid," she snarled, her voice a low, threatening whisper. "You don't know how things work. You keep your mouth shut, or I'll have you cleaning lavatories on the red eye to Buffalo. Do you understand me?" Ben visibly flinched and fell silent, his face burning with a mixture of fear and shame. He had tried to do the right thing, and he had been brutally slapped down. The old guard was firmly in control. Sarah, having witnessed this exchange, now knew the problem was even deeper than she had imagined. It wasn't just one bitter employee. It was a culture of bullying and intimidation, where new ethical employees were terrorized into silence. "I would like to speak to your supervisor." Sarah said, her voice now devoid of any warmth. It was a simple statement, but it landed with the weight of a command. Linda's smile was a triumphant, venomous thing. She had been waiting for this. The supervisor, Paul, was one of her own, a fellow lifer, a man who believed in the old ways, who would always back his people against a difficult passenger. "Be my guest," Linda said, picking up the desk phone with a flourish. "Paul, I've got a situation here at K-12. A passenger with a questionable ticket is refusing to cooperate and is becoming disruptive." She had once again expertly framed the narrative painting Sarah as the aggressor. A few minutes later, the supervisor, Paul Nowak, arrived. He was a man in his 50s with a weary bureaucratic slump to his shoulders and a coffee-stained tie. He was the embodiment of middle management apathy. His entire career had been built on the principle of avoiding decisions and deferring responsibility. He listened to Linda's dramatic, one-sided account of the events, nodding along with a practiced, sympathetic expression. He did not ask for Sarah's side of the story. He did not ask to see the ticket. He accepted Linda's version of reality as the gospel truth. He turned to Sarah, his expression one of profound weariness. "Mom," he began, his voice the droning monotone of a man who had recited this speech 1,000 times. "I understand your frustration, but our agents have a protocol to follow for security and revenue protection. Linda is one of our most experienced employees. If she says there's an issue with a document, then there's an issue. That's all there is to it." The mockery was now complete. It was no longer just the act of a single prejudiced employee. It had been officially sanctioned, rubber-stamped by her superior. The old guard had closed ranks. The system had spoken with one voice, and that voice had told Serafina Hayes that she did not belong. Paul Nowak, the station supervisor, now fully briefed by Linda, and operating on the twin fuels of institutional inertia and unexamined prejudice, prepared to deliver what he believed would be the final decisive blow. His goal was not to resolve the situation, but to end it. He was a professional problem remover. "Here's what we're going to do," he announced, his tone leaving no room for discussion. He was no longer speaking to Sarah, but past her, as if she were a piece of furniture that needed to be moved. "Clearly, we cannot validate these tickets here at the gate. The flight is in its final boarding stages, and we cannot afford any further delay." He pointed a thumb over his shoulder, gesturing vaguely down the long, sprawling concourse. Our main customer service center is back in the central rotunda near the security checkpoint. You'll need to go there. They have the resources to properly investigate non-standard ticketing documents. They can verify the payment check with the issuing authority, and if it's all legitimate, they can try to get you on the next available flight to New York. It was a masterful stroke of bureaucratic execution. He was not technically refusing her service. He was simply consigning her to an administrative black hole from which he knew she could not escape in time to make her flight. The walk to the customer service center alone was 10 minutes. The line at this time of day would be at least an hour. By the time her ticket was verified, Flight 212 would be somewhere over Pennsylvania. He was in the politest, most corporate way imaginable telling her to get lost. Arthur Vance, who had remained a silent, imposing presence at Sarah's side, finally spoke. His voice, honed by decades of courtroom cross-examinations, was dangerously soft. "Sir, are you fully aware of what you are doing?" he asked. "You are looking at 2 confirmed first-class boarding passes. You have a junior employee who has informed you of a company-wide memo regarding these exact documents, and you are choosing to ignore all of this, and are instead directing us on a fool's errand that you know will cause us to miss our flight. I would advise you to reconsider this course of action very carefully." Paul was momentarily taken aback by Arthur's articulate, lawyerly tone. For a second, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. He glanced at Linda, who gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of reassurance. Her confidence was contagious. She was the expert, the veteran. She knew what she was doing. Paul's spine, briefly stiffened by doubt, returned to its usual jelly-like consistency. "Sir, I'm not going to debate this with you," Paul said, his bureaucratic resolve hardening. "This is a matter of security protocol. There are no exceptions. The decision is final." He then turned to Linda. "Linda, close the flight. Let's get this plane out of here." He turned his back on them, a final, definitive act of dismissal. He had solved the problem. The disruptive passengers were gone, the authority of his veteran agent was upheld, and the plane would depart on time. In the small, cramped world of a mid-level airport manager, this was a victory. Sarah watched him walk away. She looked at Linda, who was now triumphantly beginning the final boarding announcements, her voice filled with a smug, vindicated cheerfulness. She looked at Ben, the young agent who was standing by the window, staring out at the plane, his shoulders slumped in defeat. She had seen the entire ecosystem of the old Pinnacle Airlines in action, prejudice, enabled by cowardice, and sanctioned by incompetence. The diagnostic test was complete. The results were terminal. "Arthur," she said softly, her voice the calm at the center of a hurricane. He said the decision was final. "I believe he is mistaken." She looked at her distinguished, impeccably dressed chief of staff. For the past hour, Linda and Paul had looked at this man and seen the person in charge. They had shown him deference while treating her with contempt. They were about to discover just how catastrophically they had misread the power dynamic. I believe Sarah continued, a glint of steel in her eyes, that it is time for us to present our own documents. Arthur Vance allowed himself a small, grim smile. He had been waiting for this command. He reached down and unlatched the 2 brass clasps on his polished, dark brown leather briefcase. The soft click-clack of the latches was the only sound in their small circle of silence. It was the sound of a guillotine being readied. The bureaucratic execution was over. The real one was about to begin. The moment that followed was one of pure, unadulterated corporate theater, executed with the cold precision of a military coup. Arthur Vance opened his briefcase. Linda and Paul, who had paused their final boarding procedures to watch, likely expected him to produce a letter from some mid-level manager, a flimsy piece of paper they could easily dismiss. The object Arthur pulled from the briefcase was not flimsy. It was a thick, heavy, leather-bound portfolio, the kind of bespoke document holder used for treaties and deeds of ownership. It was embossed with a simple, elegant logo, a stylized phoenix rising from flames, the insignia of Phoenix Capital. He walked with a slow, deliberate pace to the podium, placing the portfolio on the counter with a soft, authoritative thud. Linda and Paul stared at it, a flicker of confusion in their eyes. This was not what they had expected. Arthur opened the portfolio. He did not speak. He let the documents do the talking. The first page he revealed was not a letter. It was a high-resolution photograph. The picture was of the main trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange. At the center, standing on the balcony above the floor, was a group of people ringing the opening bell. In the very middle of the group, her hand on the gavel, smiling with a look of triumphant command, was Serafina Hayes. The banner hanging below the balcony read, "Pinnacle Airlines, PNCL relists on the NYSE under new ownership of Phoenix Capital." Linda's smug expression began to falter. A seed of doubt, small and cold, had been planted. Arthur then turned the page. The next document was the cover sheet of the official press release from the acquisition, printed on heavy watermarked paper. The headline was stark and unambiguous. "Phoenix Capital completes acquisition of Pinnacle Airlines. Serafina Hayes assumes role of chairwoman and controlling shareholder." Linda's face, which had been a mask of condescending certainty, was beginning to crumble. She looked from the press release to the calm, unreadable face of the woman in the cashmere turtleneck. Her brain began a frantic, panicked scramble to reconcile the two realities. But Arthur was not finished. He saved the kill shot for last. He turned to the final tabbed section of the portfolio. With the care of a surgeon, he removed a single multi-page document stapled in the top left corner. He laid it on the counter directly in front of Linda. The document was not a press release or a photograph. It was dense with the arcane, impenetrable language of corporate law. The title at the top, however, was terrifyingly clear. "Final decree in the matter of Pinnacle Airlines, Inc. debtor. United States Bankruptcy Court for the District of Delaware." It was the official legally binding judgment that had concluded the bankruptcy case. Arthur's finger, steady and unwavering, pointed to Article 5, Section 3A, Transfer of Controlling Interest. The section detailed in excruciating legal detail the dissolution of the old stock and the issuance of new privately held shares. His finger then slid down to the bottom of the last page to the signature block. It was the page that officially transferred the entirety of a 60-year-old American airline, its planes, its routes, its gates, its employees, its very existence into new hands. There, next to the signature of a United States federal bankruptcy judge, was the signatory block for the acquiring entity. It was a typed line that read, "For Phoenix Capital Sole Acquiring Entity," and below it, a single, elegant and powerful signature. Next to the signature, the typed name, Serafina Hayes, Managing Partner and CEO. The silence at Gate K-12 was no longer just tense. It was absolute. It was the sound of two minds, shattering of two worlds colliding with the force of an asteroid. Linda Kowalski stared at the name on the legal document. Then she slowly, agonizingly lifted her gaze to the face of the woman she had mocked, humiliated, and tried to banish. The woman she had called Honey. The woman she had accused of being a cheap freeloader. She was not an assistant. She was not a low-level employee. She was not a passenger. She was the ghost. She was the new god of their machine. She was the owner. Linda's face, a canvas of slowly dawning horror, went from pale to ashen. Her mouth opened, a small, choked gasp escaping her lips. Paul Nowak, the supervisor who had so confidently declared his decision final, looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He took an involuntary step backward, his bureaucratic shield completely vaporized, leaving him exposed and terrified. Ben, the young agent who had been watching from a distance, simply closed his eyes, a silent prayer of vindication on his lips. The unveiling was complete. The old guard of Pinnacle Airlines, in the persons of Linda and Paul, had just met their new owner, and they had failed the test of her character in the most spectacular and self-destructive way imaginable. In the profound, ringing silence of their own making, Serafina Hayes finally moved. She reached into her pocket, not for a ticket, but for her phone. The time for presenting documents was over. The time for issuing commands had begun. Serafina Hayes held her phone in her hand, her movements unhurried, almost languid. Every eye at Gate K-12 was now fixed on her, this quiet woman who had just been revealed as the ultimate hidden authority. She was no longer just a passenger being harassed. She was a queen in her own court, about to pass sentence. The profound, ringing silence was broken only by the frantic, panicked thumping of Linda Kowalski's own heart. Sarah did not dial 911. She did not call customer service. She pressed a single name on her favorites list, a direct encrypted line that bypassed all corporate switchboards. The name on her screen read Michael Corrigan. Michael Corrigan was the man Sarah had personally headhunted and hired 3 weeks ago to be the new president and CEO of Pinnacle Airlines, a legendary hard-nosed turnaround specialist known for his brutal efficiency. He was currently in the airline's newly established headquarters in New York, tasked with the Herculean job of cleaning out the Orgean stables of the old corporate culture. He answered on the first ring. "Sarah," he said, his voice a crisp professional bark. "Is the union negotiation finished?" "Any progress the union will have to wait," Michael, Sarah replied, her voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable edge of cold fury. "We have a more pressing issue, a 5-alarm fire in our own house. I am at O'Hare Gate, K-12, scheduled to be on Flight 212 to LaGuardia." Scheduled to be Corrigan, repeated immediately, catching the ominous phrasing. "That's correct," Sarah said. "I, along with Arthur Vance, have been denied boarding. The gate agent and her supervisor have declared our transitional travel documents to be fraudulent. They have publicly accused me of attempting to secure first-class passage under false pretenses, and they have instructed me to go to the main customer service desk to have my tickets verified." There was a moment of pure, unadulterated silence on the other end of the line. Michael Corrigan, a man who had faced down hostile unions, furious creditors, and catastrophic market crashes, was for a moment completely speechless. He understood the implications instantly. The new owner of his company, the woman to whom he owed his job and his loyalty, had been profiled and humiliated by their own frontline staff. It was not just an insult. It was a symptom of the very disease he had been hired to cure. "Sarah, I have no words," he finally stammered. "Who are they? Give me their names. I will have them fired before you hang up the phone. Oh, their careers are over, Michael." "That's a given," Sarah said, her voice dropping, becoming even more chillingly precise. "But this is not about 2 incompetent employees. This is a teachable moment for the entire organization. We are going to conduct a real-time, system-wide stress test of our new command and control structure. Are you ready to proceed?" "Yes, Chairwoman." Corrigan replied, his voice snapping back to attention. He knew a command when he heard one. "Good," Sarah said. "I am invoking my authority as the controlling shareholder of this company. I want you to issue a fleet-wide, full-stop ground hold for all Pinnacle Airlines flights departing and arriving at O'Hare International Airport, effective immediately. The official reason to be given to the FAA and the Airport Authority is a critical, ground-level security breach originating from internal personnel. Let the other airlines wonder what's happening. Let our own people feel the shockwave. I want every single Pinnacle employee at this airport, from the baggage handlers to the pilots, to know that something has gone catastrophically wrong at the very top of the command chain. Corrigan didn't hesitate. "Consider it done," he said. He was already signaling to his assistant to get the head of the O'Hare hub on an emergency line. "One more thing," Michael Cera added. "I want you to personally call the O'Hare station manager. Inform him that the security breach is at gate K12. Inform him that the owner of the airline is on site and is personally directing the shutdown. And tell him that I expect his physical presence at this gate in no more than 5 minutes. If he is not here, you can inform him his career with the new Pinnacle Airlines will be even shorter than yours." "Understood," Cera Corrigan said, a note of grim purpose in his voice. "I'll make the call." Cera disconnected the call and looked up. She met the terrified, pleading eyes of Linda and Paul. "The CEO is now aware of your performance review," she said, her voice flat. "He is displeased." At that exact moment, as if on cue, the giant flight information board above the gate flickered. The status of Flight 212 to New York, which had read "Final Boarding," changed. In stark, ominous red letters, a new word appeared: delayed. Then a moment later, the boards for the other 2 Pinnacle flights departing from the adjacent gates, one to Denver and one to Miami, also switched to delayed. A confused murmur went through the crowd of waiting passengers. On the tarmac visible through the large windows, the ground crew pushing back Flight 212 suddenly stopped. The tug disconnected from the aircraft's nose gear. The plane was not moving. In the cockpit of Flight 212, the captain received a frantic all-caps message on his A-CARS printer, direct from the CEO's office: immediate ground stop. "Shut down engines. Await instructions. Do not repeat. Do not leave the gate." The crushing silence of total operational paralysis descended upon Pinnacle's O'Hare hub. Every plane was frozen, every gate locked down. The entire multi-million-dollar daily operation of a major airline at one of the world's busiest airports had been brought to a screeching, grinding halt. All because 2 employees had decided to mock the wrong woman. The power of the ghost in their machine was no longer invisible. It was absolute. The reckoning at gate K12 was not an end. It was a detonation. It was the violent cleansing blast that cleared the way for something new to be built. In the hours, months, and years that followed, the shock waves of that single dramatic confrontation radiated outwards, dismantling careers, shattering a toxic culture, and forging a new legend in the unforgiving skies of the airline industry. The karma that unfolded was not a simple act of revenge. It was a complex, multi-layered process of corporate demolition and painstaking rebirth. The first to be consumed by the fire were Linda Kowalski and Paul Nowak. Their walk of shame from the gate was not the end of their ordeal, but merely the beginning of their formal excommunication. They were escorted by 2 silent, imposing corporate security officers and a visibly disgusted airport police officer, not to a comfortable HR office, but to a stark, windowless security substation deep in the bowels of O'Hare's Terminal 3. It was a room of grey linoleum floors, buzzing fluorescent lights, and the faint metallic scent of fear. They were processed with the cold, impersonal efficiency of a system designed to neutralize a threat. A senior HR manager patched in via a speakerphone read a prepared legal statement. Their employment was terminated for gross misconduct, citing specific violations of company policy and federal anti-discrimination laws. Their final paychecks would be prorated and mailed. Their health insurance would cease at midnight. They were read a formal trespass warning, informing them that if they ever set foot on Pinnacle Airlines property again, they would be subject to immediate arrest. Linda, her face streaked with tears, and ruined makeup finally broke her stunned silence, her voice a raw, desperate plea. Please, she begged the impassive security guard. 28 years. I gave them my whole life. There has to be an appeal, a grievance. The union. The HR manager's voice cut through the speakerphone, devoid of any human warmth. Ms. Kowalski, your union representative, has already been briefed on the situation by our legal counsel. They have been provided with the CCTV footage and a preliminary damage assessment from the operational shutdown. They have declined to represent you. You are on your own. That was the cruelest blow of all. The institution she had served and the union she had trusted to protect her had both abandoned her. She and Paul, who had been united in their arrogance just an hour before, now sat in a bitter, toxic silence, the architects of their own mutual destruction. As they were finally led out, a service exit into the grey, indifferent Chicago afternoon, stripped of their badges, their careers, and their dignity, they did not speak. There was nothing left to say. They had wagered everything on their own prejudice, and they had lost in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The next morning, the entire O'Hare-based staff of Pinnacle Airlines, over 2,000 employees from baggage handlers and mechanics to pilots and gate agents, were summoned to an emergency all-hands meeting in the cavernous United Cargo hangar. The new CEO, Michael Corrigan, had flown in overnight from New York. He stood on a makeshift stage, his expression grim, the newly promoted Ben Carter standing at his side. Corrigan's speech was a brutal masterpiece of corporate shock therapy. "Good morning," he began, his voice echoing through the vast space. "As of yesterday afternoon, 2 of your colleagues, a veteran gate agent and a station supervisor, are no longer with this company. Yesterday they chose to publicly humiliate a passenger based on their own personal biases. They refused her service, questioned her integrity, and threatened her. This passenger, as some of you may have heard, was Serafina Hayes, the new owner of this airline." A wave of gasps and shocked murmurs rippled through the hangar. Corrigan let the reality of it sink in before continuing, his voice rising with cold fury. Their actions triggered a fleet-wide ground stop that cost this airline, your airline, an estimated $3 million in direct operational losses. It has jeopardized crucial relationships with our partners and has brought the full unwelcome attention of the FAA down upon us. But let me be perfectly clear, this is not about the money, and this is not about one passenger's identity. This is about a sickness in our culture, a sickness that I was hired to cure, and the cure starts today. He announced the immediate suspension of the old bonus system, which rewarded speed over service. As of this moment, he declared all performance bonuses tied to on-time departures are cancelled. They are being replaced by a new system based 100% on audited customer satisfaction scores. From now on, you will be rewarded not for being fast, but for being good, for being decent. He then gestured to the young man standing beside him. This is Ben Carter. Yesterday, Ben was a junior agent. Today, he is a special assistant to the chairwoman. Why? Because when he witnessed an injustice, he had the courage to speak up. He is the model of the new Pinnacle. The old guard, the culture of bitterness, cynicism, and disrespect that led to yesterday's disaster is over. If you are on board with the new direction, you have a bright future here. If you are not, I promise you your exit will be swift. Make your choice. He ended the speech and left the stage, leaving behind a stunned, silent workforce. The message was unequivocal. The revolution was not coming. It had already happened. In the months that followed, the hard work of rebirth began. The Phoenix Protocol, the new service doctrine, was not just a memo or a series of boring online modules. It was an immersive, intensive, and often uncomfortable process of cultural deconstruction and rebuilding. Ben Carter, now a rising star within the new pinnacle, was at the heart of it. He led workshops in a newly built training center near the airport. The sessions were mandatory for every employee. In one such workshop, a group of veteran gate agents, their faces a mixture of skepticism and resentment, sat with their arms crossed. "All right, everyone." Ben began his voice, confident and clear. "Let's talk about unconscious bias. Let's talk about the K-12 protocol." He played a portion of the anonymized CCTV footage from that day on a large screen, no audio, just the silent, damning visuals of Linda's aggressive posturing and Sarah's calm, stoic demeanor. The agent in this video, Ben explained, made a snap judgment. She saw a woman of color in casual clothes, and her brain filled in a narrative of someone who didn't belong. That single flawed judgment, that 1 second failure of respect, ultimately cost this company millions of dollars and nearly cost 2 people their careers. A grizzled older agent in the back row spoke up, his voice dripping with the same sour cynicism that had defined Linda. "So what are you saying, kid? We're supposed to kiss the feet of every passenger with a sob story now. We've got planes to move. We don't have time for sensitivity training." Ben met his gaze without flinching. "No, Frank, I'm saying you have to do your job. And your job is to treat every single person who walks up to that podium with a baseline of professional dignity. Not because they might be the secret owner of the airline, but because it is the right thing to do. And because under the new Pinnacle's policies, it is a non-negotiable condition of your employment." He then put up a slide showing the new customer satisfaction-based bonus metrics. "And because if you do it well, your bonus check at the end of the year will be significantly larger. We are now paying you to be decent." Any more questions? Frank fell silent. The combination of a clear moral standard, backed by a powerful financial incentive, was a language the old guard could understand. Slowly, painstakingly, the culture began to shift. The change was not without resistance. Serafina herself had to intervene in a tense meeting with the national leadership of the Gate Agents Union. The union president, a bulldog of a man named Jeffries, accused her of creating a culture of fear. "You can't just terminate 2 long-term employees without due process, Ms. Hayes," he argued. "My members are now terrified to make a simple mistake." Sarah listened patiently. When he was finished, she leaned forward, her voice calm but unyielding. "Mr. Jeffries, what happened at Gate K-12 was not a simple mistake. It was a profound act of malice and incompetence that threatened the viability of this entire company, a company that employs 10,000 of your members. I did not fire 2 employees. I excised a cancer. Now you and I have a choice. We can spend the next year fighting over the past, or we can work together to build a future. I have just authorized a new profit-sharing plan that will put an average of $10,000 into the pocket of every one of your members by the end of next year, if our customer satisfaction scores meet their targets. I am not asking you to give up your members' rights. I am asking you to join me in making this airline so successful, so respected, and so profitable that your members will have a level of job security and financial reward they could only have dreamed of under the old ownership. What is your choice?" Jeffries, a pragmatist at heart, recognized the paradigm shift. He was being offered not a fight, but a partnership. Reluctantly, he agreed. The last bastion of the old guard's resistance had fallen. 2 years later, the transformation was so complete it was almost unrecognizable. The airline, rebranded as Pinnacle Ascend, was the darling of the industry. Its planes were full, its profits were soaring, and its customer service awards were piling up. A well-known, cynical travel blogger named Brian Spencer, who had once famously described the old Pinnacle as a Greyhound bus with wings, was on a flight from Chicago to New York to write what he expected to be a skeptical piece about their supposed turnaround. He was sitting in the new, beautifully designed first-class lounge at O'Hare when he witnessed a scene that would become the centerpiece of his article. A young man, clearly a backpacker on a budget, approached the gate agent looking flustered. His connecting flight had been cancelled due to weather on the East Coast, and he was trying to get rebooked. He was in the stratified world of air travel, the lowest priority passenger imaginable. Spencer braced himself for the inevitable bureaucratic runaround. Instead, the gate agent, a bright, poised young woman, smiled at the backpacker. "Oh, wow, that's a tough break," she said with genuine empathy. "Let's see what we can do to get you out of this Chicago weather." For the next 15 minutes, she worked patiently on her computer, exploring dozens of options. She finally found him a seat on a later flight and printed his new boarding pass. "Now," she said, "that gives you a few hours to wait. I know you're not a first-class passenger, but we have some extra meals from the earlier flight. Are you hungry? I can grab you a sandwich." The backpacker looked at her, stunned by the unexpected kindness. "Really?" he asked. "Absolutely," she replied. "Our company has a simple philosophy. We treat everyone as if they own the airline. It makes things a lot easier." Spencer, the cynical blogger, felt a lump form in his throat. He went over and asked the agent for her name, and then asked to speak to her manager. The manager who came out to meet him was a confident, well-dressed young executive. It was Ben Carter. Spencer explained what he had witnessed. Ben smiled a knowing smile. "I'm not surprised," he said. "That's the Phoenix Protocol in action. That's the standard we live by now." Intrigued, Spencer asked where that philosophy had come from. Ben hesitated for a moment, then decided to share a sanitized version of the legend. He told the story of a very important passenger who was once treated poorly at a gate, and how that single incident became the catalyst for the entire corporate reinvention. The blogger was mesmerized. He had his story. It was not a story about new seats or better food. It was a story about a corporate soul, lost and then found. The final scene of Pinnacle's rebirth did not take place in a boardroom or a busy airport terminal. It took place late one night in the echoing expanse of a maintenance hangar at O'Hare. Serafina Hayes, in town for a surprise visit, stood with the lead mechanic, a gruff 60-year-old Union veteran named Sal, the very man who had been a chief antagonist during her initial negotiations. They stood under the massive wing of a brand-new Airbus A321neo, sharing coffee from a single thermos. They were not talking about contracts or profits. They were poring over the schematics for a new, more efficient auxiliary power unit, arguing like two passionate engineers. Sal pointed to a diagram. "If we reroute this hydraulic line, we can cut the replacement time by 40%. The old management would never have listened to us. They just looked at the labor costs." Sarah nodded, a smudge of grease on her cheek. "And how much would that save us in fuel and operational delays over the life of the aircraft? Millions," Sal said with a grin. "Millions for your profit-sharing plan, boss." She smiled back. This was what it was all about. Not the power plays, not the dramatic firings, but this. The quiet, collaborative, respectful work of building something better together. The hard karma that had destroyed the careers of two prejudiced employees had not been an end. It had been a beginning. It had cleared the ground for a new culture, to grow a culture of dignity that was now lifting an entire airline and all of its people to a higher altitude than they had ever flown before. The story of Serafina Hayes and Gate K-12 is a powerful lesson in the modern world. It proves that a person's worth is never defined by their appearance, and that true power often resides where we least expect it. The gate agents made a critical error. They judged a book by its cover, failing to realize that the person they were mocking had written the book, owned the printing press, and had the power to shut down the entire library. Their downfall is a stark reminder that in any business, from a coffee shop to a global airline, prejudice is not just a moral failing. It is a catastrophic financial liability. The old guards of bias and disrespect will inevitably crumble when they collide with the new, unshakable forces of vision, merit, and consequence. Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone was so profoundly misjudged based on their appearance? What do you think is the most effective way to challenge outdated systems and the prejudices they enable? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of hard karma and quiet strength, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with your network and be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss another story of justice in action. Thank you for listening.